Tonight's scripture comes from Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, and I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. And it reads as follows. Now as they went on their way, he entered a village where a woman named Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks, so she came to him and asked, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things, but few things are needed. Indeed, only one. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her.
It is truly a gift and a privilege to be in this space with you today. I extend an incredible thank you to your pastors who are entrusting this moment to me. It is not a privilege that I take lightly. As we engage Martha's story, let us pray. God, we ask that you silence any voice within us but your own, that we may hear, that we may respond, that we may be transformed. In Jesus' name, amen. So Jesus visits Martha's home, and it is likely that he brought others with him, even though they aren't mentioned in the text. His disciples, or a few of them, are probably there. So I want you to imagine for a moment that several guests have arrived, they need to be fed, and there's only one person cooking and cleaning and trying her best to finish because they have now gotten there before she could complete her task. Martha, who is the presumed matron of the family, welcomes Jesus into her home. And Jesus and his guests settle in. Mary, the younger sister, makes her way in, greets Jesus fondly because both women show how familiar and at ease they are with Jesus because they are all really good friends. Mary sits down at the feet of Jesus and he begins to teach. Martha, I imagine, walks by from time to time with a bowl or a pot, giving Mary a side-eye, exasperated look, becoming angrier and angrier as nobody seems to notice the burden she is under. And finally, it's just too much. And it gets the best of her. She enters the common space, and rather than ask for her sister's help, she interrupts Jesus' teaching, and she says to him, Jesus, do you not care that Mary has left me to do all this work alone? Do you not see how unfair this is? Tell her to help me. And if I'm being honest, y'all, at this point, I'm actually in Martha's amen corner. I mean, talk about the injustice of it all. Mary, please just get up and help your sister. But then Jesus says something that kind of catches me off guard. Jesus says, Martha, dear, you are pulled away and worried by things that you will have to do again tomorrow, when I am here now and what I offer you won't be available to you later. Mary has chosen to receive what she needs, what will last, and she has chosen what is good or better. Y'all, this is the part right here that messed me up. Because I wanted to know, as I often do with stories, though I love stories, but I often want to know what happens after the story ends. I wanted to know what was Martha's response, because I wanted Martha to defend her argument. And so I wrestled and I asked questions and I pulled, because I feel like sometimes Jesus says a thing and we don't grapple with it. We just say, okay, Jesus said it, it's right. Let's not figure anything else about it. But I had to wrestle with this thing. And where I landed was that perhaps this was all about her story. That this was about the story that had been shaped for her since birth. Could it be that Jesus was addressing the parts of Martha's story or narrative that had been shaped by society, religion, and her family that were not completely accurate? Parts that hindered her from receiving what God wanted her to access. Now, I'm a fan of the work of Dr. Naeem Akbar, who is a psychologist of people of African descent, and he says that power in society rests with those who control the language. Those who hold the authority to shape people's stories are able to shape definitions and determine who gets access to what. You all people, we alter our behavior based upon the narrative we accept as true. Now, we don't have a say in what other people believe or not believe about us, but what we believe about ourselves dictates the outcome of how we live and what we believe ourselves capable of or incapable of. But perhaps even more importantly, our narratives help determine what we give ourselves permission to do or not to do. Martha was doing exactly what she was taught to do. A good woman serves and only attends to her own needs if the needs of others are met. She had been told that was her story, her role, her obligation. But that narrative was flawed. Maybe not completely wrong, but flawed. Serving others is not the issue. Serving others and then being uncomfortable with also being served or unable to acknowledge when we need to be served is an issue. Now, Jesus did several things in this passage that I believe spoke to a reshaping of Martha's narrative. Now, I'll only mention a few in the hopes that we may find, all of us, a little more permission to reclaim those things that make us whole. The first thing Jesus did in reshaping Martha's narrative was he challenged socialized roles. I was once invited to a meeting with some high-ranking administrators to discuss an issue impacting the university community that we were a part of. I was the only woman in the room who was invited there to actually contribute to the conversation. And about halfway through the meeting, the highest ranking administrator in the room turns to me and says, "Could you go and get me a hot cup of tea, please?" Immediately, my role was redesignated. It was reclarified and my place demoted in the eyes of everyone at the table. Not that serving him a cup of tea was beneath me, but that based upon my gender, I had been reassigned a role and it denied me access to a table that I had previously been invited to. He was reshaping my narrative and therefore my position in the room. He was saying that to the people in that room that I should be the one to serve him tea. That was my role. Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus and was hearing, which in scripture comes with an obligation to obey, to shift behavior. She was sitting in a place usually reserved for men. She was marking herself as a disciple of Christ. When we usually hear the word disciple, we think of who? The 12 men who traveled with Jesus. But here Jesus not only teaches a woman, but he also invites Martha to the table of equal discipleship that her faulty narrative had denied her access to. Now, I can't help but to think that Martha's anger was at least somewhat steeped in the extremes of what Mary should or should not do. Mary should be helping Martha. That was right. But she should not be assuming the role of men. That was wrong. And perhaps this is why Martha seems so sure that Jesus will back her up. And it was a bit jarring because it appears that Jesus actually rebukes Martha. But does he? Does Jesus actually say Martha is wrong? No. Jesus did not use language of right and wrong, should or shouldn't. Jesus spoke in every translation in this passage that I read, or every translation of the passage that I read, of what was good, what was better, or what was essential. Jesus implies here that sometimes life is not about the absolutes of right and wrong. Jesus not only invites Martha to join Mary, but he invites Martha away from these very polarized absolutes, which are often used in oppressive culture to control the behaviors of others. Sometimes reclaiming what we need to be whole means interrogating the ways we apply absolutes to our sense of responsibility and roles, things that keep us from giving ourselves permission to reclaim what God already intended for us to have, wholeness and health. But second, Jesus reshapes Martha's narrative by challenging the imbalanced power structure of her faulty narrative. The inclination to automatically dismiss any part of others' narratives that are different from our own is actually quite common. So Martha was seeing through the lens given to her But here Jesus was challenging Martha to consider the perspective of her younger sister as valuable in critiquing her own faulty narrative. Jesus was calling for mutual growth, giving and receiving between two sisters of different positions in the household to learn from and influence each other, which is a balancing of power. When I was in seminary, a group of friends came over to my apartment for lunch, and we were discussing a decision of a church in LA, y'all, this was like over 20 years ago, to rent out their space for secular events on the weekends. Now, there was some controversy over a concert that had taken place in the space one Saturday night and what had happened in that concert. And at the time, I felt that sharing a sacred space with such secular events was unwise and disrespectful. But a friend of mine became angry and challenged the notion that maintaining a sacred space that exists in the hearts of people more so than in the building was not more important than the jobs that events like that concert provided. She said kids who couldn't eat before can now eat because their parents are working. And I was humbled because I realized that her experiences, many of which were even far more marginalized than my own, her perspective, her story was necessary in critiquing the faulty parts of my own story. That our humble engagement in diverse community, in part, makes us better because it exposes our blind spots and assumptions. It was years later that I was reminded that I come from a people who do not separate the sacred and the secular, that we invite the presence of God not sometimes, but all the time, that it is white supremacist culture that separated the material from the spiritual in order to commodify human bodies. Dominant power objectifies, and it objectifies those considered less than and regulates whole populations to substandard qualities of life through an imbalance of power. But we inherently do this as well in our own personal and communal relationships. Here Jesus, a poor, brown-skinned Jewish son of a single teenage mother, was using the person who had the lowest rank in the household, that of youngest daughter. She had a sister Martha and a brother Lazarus. Using the youngest daughter to teach everyone not what was right, but what was better, what was good, what was essential. He was showing Martha that Mary's decision to defy custom and choose the better option could serve to critique and shift Martha's own story. Jesus was balancing the power structure. But the third thing Jesus did in reshaping Martha's narrative was to challenge moral superiority as a means of self-worth. Martha asked Jesus to question a question that really wasn't a question, because she then proceeded to tell him what he should do. She needed him to affirm her position as right because her sense of self-worth and value was tied to her ability to be right. Now, something we don't talk much about, and perhaps we should, is the connection between supremacist patriarchal culture and self-idolatry. That in order to declare superiority, supremacy needed legitimacy, and chose to do so by proclaiming that God aligned with its beliefs. So then, who was worshipped really wasn't God, but whiteness or patriarchy or wealth or all three. Either way, it is an attempt to convince the self and others that God is made in our image, that God looks, thinks, and acts like me. This is self-idolatry. Much of American culture is predicated upon self-idolatry. And you all, self-idolatrous culture produces self-idolatrous behavior, even if inadvertently. What do I mean by that? I mean that we may not be self-idolatrous in our belief system, but because we are socialized in this culture, we can produce self-idolatrous behavior. In Black and brown culture, this may show up as respectability politics. The belief that we must adhere to the rigid rules and behaviors of white respectability in order to be considered enough, acceptable. Or for Black women, this is what shows up in the strong Black woman, a term I'm sure most of you in this community already know. One who is independent, emotionally regulated at all times, and a caregiver. Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes, a colleague of mine, reminds us that only God can be all those things at once, which means strong Black women are being held and are holding ourselves to a standard that only God can meet. Self-idolatrous behavior, even though we ourselves are not self-idolatrous. If the standard set for me and accepted by me in my core narrative is that in order to be enough, to be worthy of love, that I must be perfect, then I will never be enough to deserve rest. I will never feel as if I can make the changes necessary to be whole, because if my worth is based on what I do, then doing nothing means I am nothing. Because when I rest, I'm not doing anything. I'm just resting. Can you see the problem? Is it wrong to do good? No. But it is problematic if we are doing good in an attempt to earn something God has already freely given us. Our value is based solely on the fact that we are loved by God, and there is no higher currency in existence than the love of God. Martha was the mule pulling the plow while everyone else was eating freely from the yield of her labor. If we are earning love, then we can never own it, never live inside of it, never possess it, never allow it to possess us. And look at her question to Jesus. Do you not care that she has left me to do all this work? And that's it. Martha is asking, am I invisible to God? Because my back-breaking toil doesn't seem to matter to you. Can you not see that we are mules of the earth? I know my brother doesn't see me, and it seems like my sister doesn't see me, but do you not see me, God, drowning under the weight of all this work? Martha feels invisible to God. You all refusing to reclaim what makes us whole can sever some of our most important relationships, to include our relationship with God. Martha felt invisible, but she was most invisible to herself. Our entire lives are filled with messages of there not being enough. Not enough time, not enough provision, not enough happiness, not enough opportunity, which mirrors this idea that I am not enough. But our God is a God of abundance. There is always enough, even when what we have is limited. A sister from Haiti once told me that the Haitian Bible translates, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, as I can make do with all things through Christ who strengthens me. She said, we understand that no matter how little we have, God can make that thing stretch. And philosopher Euripides once wrote that enough is abundance to the wise. Enough is abundance to the wise, y'all. We serve a God who, through the willingness of one to share in community, fed more than 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. That God can make time for you to get what you need. A God who says, cast the net on the other side of the boat, and the bounty is so great that the net can't hold it. That God can help you reclaim what you need to make you whole without fear of losing out. A God who knows every hair on your head, whose love can never be separated from us. Anyone who gives, but who has stopped receiving, is no longer fit to give. Jesus was literally in Martha's living room, and she was in the kitchen. Because perhaps she didn't really believe she deserved to lay claim to the things that made her whole. Or maybe she just didn't trust God's love enough to cover her. Either way, thank God that was not the end of her story. And I thank God that it's not the end of ours. In the name of all that is good and right and just, in the name of rest, amen.
Oh my Lord. Oh, Dr. Battle. What an incredibly thought-provoking, transformative, confession eliciting sermon that was for me. And I can't speak for anybody else, but thank you for that word. Beloved, we are going to take a couple of moments just to reflect on what we heard on what we felt, on what we experienced from this beautiful sermon. And then we will come back for Talk Back to the Text with the preacher for tonight, Reverend Dr. Donna Coletrane Battle. We'll be back shortly. All righty then.
My.
Welcome into the room, Dr. Battle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Listen.
Listen. Here's my notes. So nobody else have questions or comments. I do. So what's happening?
But she's at the beginning, at the top, when she talked about Jesus says a thing and we just leave it at that. We don't wrestle with it.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Because how many times have you heard this? God said it. That's it.
I mean, we sing that. We sing that song faithfully.
Yep.
But I really want to hear her say a little bit more about that, because that's woo.
Yes, I think that is a very important point. So when you look at the mystics, and I would say most mystics across all religions would consider Jesus a mystic.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus, I think, exemplified this over and over again as a rabbi and as a teacher in his space, which was, whether it was through the parables or through a comment that he made, there was a form of teaching that says, I say a thing or I do a thing in order to engage you in this way, right? In order to draw you in, to make you ask questions, to make you uncomfortable. And so this was a natural pattern of Jesus, but I think that alone also gives us permission and an invitation to say, we engage always both our spirit and our soul in our spirituality, but we also engage our critical thinking. And again, it's not either or, it's both and. And that unless we have to wrestle with a thing or lean into a thing, there is no growth, there is no stretching. We always remain where we are. So I would say even just the way Jesus lived and taught and engaged spaces where he was teaching, said that he was always inviting us through questions and through agitation to wrestle with things that even he said and did.
Yeah. Wow.
We do have a question from Reverend Marissa in Atlanta. She said, so many powerful insights. Thank you. But can you please say more about this idea that something might not be wrong, but there may be better?
Yes. So again, in white culture, in dominant culture, there is many ways that have been employed or deployed in order to control. And one of those ways is this very polarized idea of absolutes, right? Something is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. Right. But again, we are a people, and most indigenous people don't live in the absolutes. We live very much in the either or, as in we can hold multiple realities at once. Yes. And so when we live in these absolutes of right and wrong, all the time. It doesn't allow for all of the many variations of people's experiences. So our assumptions automatically kick in, and we start to make decisions and behaviors, and we move in relationship in a way that says that everybody's experience has been just like mine, where that's not the case, right? So I imagine you have experienced in your life where, you know, one action or one decision made over here by one person is a right decision, but under different circumstances, that same decision wouldn't be right. I mean, parents often talk about this, teachers often talk about this, that people and children are so different that you can't necessarily make the same decision for both. So it's not that either or is right or wrong, is that depending on the circumstance, it may be right or wrong. And I think that because all of us are at varying levels of spiritual and emotional maturity, sometimes even what we can hold in a moment is different for everyone in the space. And so I may only be able to get or understand or grasp at this point what might be good, right? Even though I'm being invited to what is better. And that doesn't mean that where I am is wrong. It just means that we're at different places because we have different experiences, and we have we are very dynamic in this way. And so we are just all far too complex and diverse for us to live in these absolutes. And so the either or for me, the hard absolutes are always around when harm is caused, right? We draw absolutes when harm is caused. No, that's a hard line. But so much more of life is what many would say is the gray area. I just call it the either or. And I think we are people who exemplify that even in our emotional and spiritual lives, as we can hold many emotions and realities at once.
My goodness. So one of the things that I wrote down was when you said that, and this is an outgrowth of white supremacy culture, right? Sense of value tied to one's ability to be right, right? Our sense of value is tied to whether we're seen as right. Talk about that some more. Talk about the harm that we do to ourselves when we go ahead, please.
Yeah. You know, Dr. Irie, I would honestly say that this is the greatest crux of particularly Christian spiritual maturing.
Yeah.
Right? That this is the goal. The goal is to actually live and embody what it means for our identity and our value to be solely based upon the love of God and nothing else.
Yeah.
And so in white supremacist culture, as I noted, it's self-idolatrous culture. Right. And so in order for whiteness to be right all the time, it had to become synonymous with God, which is the only being in existence that's right all the time.
Yeah.
And so what happens though, when you're held to that standard, that means that anything I say is true and right. Right. And that also means that my identity, so our identities are always bound to our value system. So wherever we find our identity is where we place our value, which is why I often invite. So for example, I had a professor once teach us that, you know, most of the things that we give for identity markers are more like adjectives. Right. So if I said there is a brown, green, shiny, and you'll say a brown, green, shiny, what? Right? Because those are adjectives, but there's no noun. And so he says that the noun is God's love. The adjectives of our identities, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a sister, I'm a clergy person, right? And so all of these things are the dynamic or static identifiers, but they're not the core identifiers. But if a static identifier becomes our core identity, because we cannot be perfect in those things, that means our value is always shifting based upon what we see as successful. So if my core value system is that I'm a mother, I mostly identify as a mother. When my child or my children make decisions that I don't like or that I see as wrong, my value goes along with my identity.
That's right.
That makes sense. And so in white idolatry culture, the identity is that I don't want to just be similar to God. I am God. Right?
Mhm.
And that also
Mhm.
creates a lot of shame. And it
That,
creates shame because you can
that's it.
never attain that, right? It's
That's
a
it.
lie. There's no way to attain that. But that means all of our culture has been shaped around that. And so we
Yeah.
swim in those waters in a way that says that, again, in Black and brown culture, we may not see ourselves as self-idolaters, right? We don't see ourselves as one and the same with God, but we are having to survive in a culture where that's the standard.
Yeah.
And so, because that's the standard, then we take on practices and beliefs that say, I have to be perfect. I have to be right. And if I don't hit these markers, right? Because it's also a production based society. If I don't hit these markers, because I'm constantly being told I am not enough and I'm not loved, I'm not valued if I don't have or produce these things, then that becomes the ways in which we focus our energies on our identity and our value.
Woo.
Wow.
Battle. Okay,
Does
before I
anybody
say
have
we do
anything?
have another question.
Okay, go
We
ahead.
do, but before I say that, because I know there are quite a few people who are watching on YouTube, and they cannot comment right now because of the way we're streaming to our app directly. If you want to get your questions in, if you go over to thegatheringexperience.com on watch WGTV, you can go in and post your questions in there. Even if you post them on Facebook, I can read them in. Or if you like to join us in the app on WGTV, you can post your questions right in the app, and we can make sure that Reverend Donna can get your questions. But Edwin, Reverend Donna says, amazing. Can you share more about Jesus showing us the dance with the sacred and the secular?
Mm.
Yes, I can. And so I think Jesus does this in a number of ways. So Jesus does it in one of the ways that we've already kind of talked about, which is inviting Martha away from these absolutes, right? Like secular is wrong, sacred is good, right? No, so that's one of the ways I feel like Jesus does that in this passage. But I think the other way is in affirming Mary's decision not to abide by convention, right? To press past that in this invitation that he makes to Martha, he's saying to her, I am here right now, right? And because I am here, wherever I show up, it's always right to engage me,
Mm.
right? And he was showing up in her living room while she, quote unquote, had all these other more important things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, and I think so, I think that invitation was very much about him saying, right, like you take advantage of God when you see and experience God right here and right now. And I think that that is that feeds into this idea that, you know, there's only certain places we should encounter God. There's only certain ways in which we should be prepared for God, right? She was preparing in the kitchen to serve God rather than engaging God on the floor of her living room. Do you see? And so
Yeah.
I think that those are the ways and the nuances that we see God inviting her into that. But, you know, then we have other passages of scriptures. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof.
Yeah.
Right. So we see these ways in which there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. Right. There's nowhere we can go where we are not in God's presence. Right. And so I think it goes back to this other kind of thought and idea that in, of course, Black, brown, and other indigenous communities, we don't separate these parts of ourselves. We don't take our spirituality out when we move in the world. That God is a part of all of it.
Yeah.
And so whether it's being called secular or sacred or not, God is there, which always makes all things sacred.
You know, there is something else in here, well, many things in here, but this is the first time I've heard that Jesus in this text actually flipped the script on Martha's understanding of herself in the traditional role of a woman in that time. And what I heard you say that Jesus is doing is turning that on its head.
Yes.
that
Yes.
you don't have to be. Jesus was trying to set her free.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
That's exactly right. That everything that the men have access to, that those who are freest in society have access to, I give you access to.
Wow.
Right? Even as Jesus himself was a part of the very religion that
Yes.
helped shape her narrative.
That's right.
Jesus was living and moving in the brokenness of the world just like her.
Yeah.
Right? But was prophetically calling her out of that place into like a higher transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That don't even be bound by the religions that we think, right, give us control that don't. Right? We gotta make sure we're holding these things in the right way.
We do have some comments in our chat. On our app, Reverend Camila.
Yeah, you gonna read Tracy's?
You can go ahead, or someone can.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So one of our ministry partners, Dr. Battle, Reverend Tracy Tejado, Anderson Tejado says, I have literally always wondered what Martha's reaction was to Jesus' statement. This story reminds me of the Canaanite woman. In both instances, Jesus says some stuff that made me look, I don't know what that made me look again, if only in my mind. I don't know what this word means. Askance? Is that maybe she had a typo? I don't know. Thank you, Dr. Coletrane Battle, for this amazing word. It has impacted my imagination on so many levels. And then our ministry partner, Lisa, she says, your definition of self-idolatry smacked me down. She says, can you touch on this again for her? But then later on, she says, you addressed it.
Okay.
Reverend Doctor, would you mind sharing with us what you did when the person in the room said, "Go get my tea"? I'm from a corporate background, and I understand what that looks like, but I would like to know your response in that regard.
And can I add on to that? Can you tell us what does a woman do when she's asked to get the tea?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let me tell you what I did first. So if you know, I shared in that account that I was the only woman in the room who was invited to participate in the conversation. So lunch was being served. And so all of the other women in the room were caterers, right? So they were the servers.
Okay.
And so when he turned to me and he asked me, I did not get up from my seat, right? I said, just one moment. And the first server who came through, I said, ma'am, I said, the president has asked for a cup of hot tea. Can you get that for him, please? And I made sure the whole conversation stopped. And she says, for sure. And I continue to engage. So I didn't get up. I didn't get up. What do you do? You know, there are a number of things that I can tell you to do that in the moment, I promise you, will not come to mind. Because all of us we're shocked, right?
Yeah.
And we will all respond in different ways. I will say this, that however you respond in the moment, just use it as a moment to be curious about yourself, right? And always know that just because you don't respond in the moment in the way you would have liked to, doesn't mean that you don't need to reflect and then maybe return to the conversation. So there have been many times where I have been in a situation, I'm a person, I don't always do well in the moment, right? And I'm like, ooh, right, what? But after I think about it, I'm like, man, I wish I had done X, Y, and Z. And as I have gotten older, right, and my elders have poured into me, I have learned to take courage and to learn when I need to readdress a conversation, even with very high-ranking people, right? So whether that is a phone call, whether that is an email, whether that is can I get 10 minutes with you? You know, I had to reflect upon this, but I needed you to know that I that was problematic, and I saw it as disrespectful. And you may not have intended it that way, but I feel like I would be doing myself a disservice and you a disservice if I didn't at least give you the opportunity to respond to how that one reflected in the space and how that made me specifically feel as your colleague.
Excellent.
Just
Thank
know
you
that
so
the
much.
moment isn't the only moment to respond. You can always come back around to it.
That's great.
Thank
That's
you.
real good.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and you know
That's
what? And
real.
so often we
That's real.
don't come back. So
We don't.
often we internalize that and we
Mm-hmm.
build resentment and
Yep.
and self-loathing and all these other things because we just
Yeah.
let all that stuff pile up that we don't address.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say thank you to the Reverend Dr.
The
Donna Coletrane
my
Battle, because
Lord.
she came and did exactly what I knew she would do. But girl, you did the text. I wasn't even expecting that, but I knew what you was gonna do. Not with the text. I knew what you was gonna do in the moment, in the preaching moment, and you did that. You have blessed the people. Thank you so much. We do have a few announcements before we get out of here. As you heard our new ministry partner, Edwin Robinson, tell you, there is the People's Convention coming up next weekend on from the 28th through the 1st. If you are interested in joining, I will actually be one of the speakers in this convention, but we are looking for a gathering delegate to accompany me.
Yes.
So if you are interested in joining, please contact me and let me know. You can hit me up in our group me, or you can send me a message, email, text. Most of y'all got my phone number. Just let me know, because we would like the gathering to have a delegation at the People's Convention so we can help prepare ourselves to do the work here in Dallas that needs to be done. Also want to let you know that we've been talking about this app. If you have not downloaded the Gatherings app, it is so important that you do this, because going forward, we will be streaming on our app and on our website. We'll stream to YouTube too. But as you can see, you will need to be in the app to really have the conversation with us, or on our website. But it's not just for our worship. There is so much more that is available in the app that will benefit you. We can stay connected in our group me in the app. You can join our prayer call right from the app. You can send your prayer requests, and you can keep up to date with what's going on with the gathering. And we have devotionals and Bible studies and all type of things that is great. If you have not downloaded the app, for people who have an iPhone, go over to the Apple Store. For my Android users, go over to Google Play. You can scan this QR code or put in the Gathering of Women's Church, and you should be able to get the app. Also, we are going to be celebrating 5 years of the gathering. Thank you, Lord. Join us for a weekend. On Friday, we will be having a ministry partner dinner. You will have more information coming this week in the app, and we will need you to RSVP so we can have an accurate head count for those who are in the DFW. Or if you are coming in town for the anniversary, please come in for Friday so we can have a meal together. But we're also going to have our worship service in person and online on that Saturday, and we're looking forward to everybody. We're asking everybody to put 5 on it so that we can have a great weekend and the church can help fund a lot of this. And we ask that you put 5 on it by contributing whatever denomination of 5 that you are able to give, so we can have a wonderful weekend. I want to remind you, tomorrow we will have our weekly prayer call, and I believe Reverend Monique will be leading tomorrow at 7 p.m. If you want to send your prayer requests, again, you can do it in the app. You can join the prayer. Just go to the We Gather app. It'll bring you right into the Zoom room. Or if you do not have the app yet, you can go to thegatheringexperience.com, and on our calendar page, you'll see this picture. Just click the link below that picture, and you will be right into the room. Then finally, there are 4 ways that you can give to support the gathering, or 5, as we said. You can give on Givelify, Cash App, PayPal, mailing a check to the church, or just scan. Your giving keeps us going. And now, finally, I said finally, but no, really, this is finally. If you are interested in becoming a ministry partner, because at the gathering, we don't have members, we have ministry partners, because we believe we are partnering in this thing together. Our ministry partners join us for worship regularly. They give to support the church, and they use their gifts in all type of ways. We would love to have you as a ministry partner. You can contact us at thegatheringexperience.com, and I will be happy to have you as a ministry partner, as well as Dr. Irie. I believe I said everything, Dr. Irie, did I? Hello, did I did? Okay. She's on mute. Well, Dr. Battle, can you give us a
Yes, you
can
did.
you give us a benediction?
Yes, 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 yes. Let's take a moment. Let's breathe God in and receive this blessing. May the grace of God and all the bounty and abundance of God's blessings and gifts be given to us. And may we open our hearts and our hands to say yes and to receive without question or exception, that we may be made whole. So it is, and so it shall be, in Jesus' name. Amen and Ashe.
Amen.